I want to share a couple of thoughts with respect to the moment we are living in. At the LGW board retreat, the last board retreat I was involved with, I was immediate past chair, no longer chair. I talked about the exponential age we are going to be living through, part because of technologies such as artificial intelligence, biotech, 3D printing, renewable energy. We are going to be living through transformative times, and artificial intelligence will play a significant role, not in the decades ahead, in the weeks and months ahead. So what I shared with everyone was the uh, thoughts on exponential growth and why we as humans have a tough time understanding exponential growth. This is why a lot of people didn't understand when there were only a few cases of COVID in the country. How could there all of a sudden be so much COVID spreading so fast? Because of exponential growth. There are technologies that also face that exponential growth. So one analogy or one example actually goes back to a Persian story of Indians having invented chess and giving it to Persians, and Persians inventing backgammon and giving it back. Anyway, the king that had the chess invented to give as a gift had asked the inventor what he wanted, and the inventor had said, all I want is a grain of rice on a chessboard, doubled every square. And the king thought, though, this guy isn't asking for much, not understanding exponential change. So if you take a grain of rice and put it on a chessboard, on the second square, 2 grains of rice, the third square, 4 grains of rice. If you go to the 64th chess square, there will be more rice, enough rice to cover the entire US in about a foot of rice. That is more than 450 times the global production of rice. So why do I share this and why do I say this? Is that I've seen people, there's a new study that came out by Pew when people were asked about artificial intelligence. 60-some% said, yes, it will be very impactful for people and organizations. Only 20-some% said it will be impactful on their lives and their job and their organization. I'm hoping we don't make that mistake at LGW, which is why I'm thrilled to have a woman who is a leading thinker on data science, artificial intelligence. She's a criminologist, has spent her life dedicated to equity and understanding the biases that can be baked into these algorithms. So I am absolutely honored and thrilled for us to have Renée Cummings with us. Renée, welcome. We are thrilled to have you with LGW.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is such an honor, and I know it's going to be a very unique pleasure.
Renée, I would love to first start out with actually a very different question than I was thinking of. Vast majority of people in not technology, but artificial intelligence. And I've been, for the podcast and my own interests and clients, I've been talking to tons and tons of people. There are mostly white, young men. What got you involved in this field, and what unique role and insight do you feel you bring to this field that's going to transform our lives?
Oh, thank you for that fantastic question. I think I've always seen myself as a futurist. And one of the things that I've always been committed to is justice, and justice in the form of fairness, equity, legacies. And one of the things that always excited me was ensuring that different communities, different groups got to experience the fullness of life. And I felt that through artificial intelligence, we had an opportunity to really expand the kind of access, resources, and opportunities that communities could participate in. But then there were some challenges. And I was seeing those challenges from the criminal justice system, where for over a decade, we had already deployed these algorithmic decision-making systems. And these algorithmic decision-making systems deployed in the criminal justice system were creating these zombie predictions and overestimating the risks of Black and Brown defendants. And that started to trouble me, particularly within the context of juveniles, and juveniles not getting the ability to truly explore their fullest potential because an algorithm kept saying that they were at risk. So that got me thinking. And then I realized that there was need for a voice in AI. And I felt that someone coming from the criminal justice system would have a really unique perspective, because that's where we were seeing the deployment of most of the algorithms. That's where we were seeing the most challenges. That's where we were coming face to face with the bias and discrimination. And that's where algorithms were making some very high stakes decisions. And we know when we think about criminal justice, we're talking about life, we're talking about liberty, and we're talking about legacies. And we're also talking about the impact that a life in the criminal justice system has not only on the individual, but the family of that individual, the community, and society. So for me, when I started to think about data, I said data is about measurement. Data is about decision making. And if we are to do data right, then we need to make the best decisions with the data that we have. And for us to truly get the best out of data science, we really need to incorporate an interdisciplinary kind of thinking that would stretch the imagination of data scientists and anyone using data to build algorithms. So I think what I said to myself is that AI needs just a little more imagination, and I think I brought that to the space.
You have, and that's why I love your story, your background, your passion, Renee. So now you mentioned algorithms, and many people might not be familiar with what an algorithm is, even though algorithms at this point decide who gets a mortgage and who doesn't. They decide where DC police end up being present or not being present. So there are lots of algorithms, and you mentioned AI. What is an algorithm and what is AI, and the role these will play in all of our lives?
Fantastic. So I would say this: an algorithm is like a recipe. As we make cookies, as we bake a cake, as we prepare our favorite meal, an algorithm is very similar to a recipe. So in an algorithm, we include an extraordinary amount of data, but we also include instructions for the algorithm to do something, either make a recommendation, make a prediction, provide some insight, provide some foresight, provide a risk score. And for us to come up with the output, we need to focus on the input. So what do we put in there? First of all, there is no algorithm and there is no AI without data. So we put a lot of data, different types of data, and we mix that around using what we could consider code, which is the instruction that we're going to give that algorithm. And that algorithm comes out with a recommendation. So when you Google, when you search, and you ask, what are the 10 top restaurants in DC? That is a recommendation algorithm that has been built using all the data, all the restaurant information, all the feedback that people have posted on the internet saying, I love this restaurant, I didn't like this restaurant, great menu here, awful menu there, all of that coming together as ingredients to give that instruction. So that's what an algorithm is. But beyond that, an algorithm is very, very powerful, because an algorithm has the ability to make a decision about you without you knowing. And that creates some of the ethical challenges. AI to me is a language. AI is now a form of communication, and that's how we're communicating. But AI is not a new concept. AI was a concept that was developed, let's say maybe in the mid-50s. There was a conference, main scientists out of this country, Dartmouth University, and they came up with this concept of AI. Of course, with the sophistication of statistics and computing and coding and machine learning and deep learning and the ability to mimic our neural networks using computers, we have been able to advance that first idea of AI. AI is really our computer doing very human-like things, very human-like tasks. So making those recommendations, making those predictions, working as a personal assistant, providing just an extraordinary amount of information. So the easiest thing that I would say when it comes to AI is that we've always tried to define AI. But the one thing I've come to realize at this moment is that there is no standard definition for AI. And if anything, it is still very undefined. So the best definition of AI is it is still very undefined, but we can certainly break it down as things that, a computer would do given the right kind of data, given the right kind of code, and given the right kind of information. And of course, AI is transformative. It is really reimagining just about every business model possible. And it is proving to be one of the most extraordinary technologies of our lifetime.
I wholeheartedly agree, Renee. I believe to my core that in the next 2 years, we will experience more change than easily past 20, possibly past couple of hundred. And I think a lot of people have very little sense of what's ahead. But back to your point about the data, is that if it's drawing on data, I want to understand the bias before moving on further from it. There can be bias in data even when unintended. And I'm sure you're familiar, Amazon had used data, AI, in recruiting people. And what the AI pretty quickly found out is that certain men with certain backgrounds were more likely to succeed because that's what the data showed. So the data bias contributed to the bias in hiring. Now, all kinds of organizations, including many
So
involved
there's
with
just one thing I want to add there. Remember, the data that created that hiring algorithm was based on resumes submitted. So the resumes is where that data was scraped from. And what happened is that most of the resumes used to build the algorithm were the resumes of men who attended a particular school, who had a particular background, who had particular interests, and who had particular experiences. So that's where the data came from. So it is the input of the information that creates the challenges as well.
So that data is really important to see where the data comes from, to make sure there isn't the bias in it. But part of the concern, again, on the bias front, before then looking at the unleashing of potential, is that many of the algorithms are picking out so many different factors. Yuval Harari talked soon that algorithm finds out that people, for example, who applied for a loan on a Wednesday afternoon are tiny bit less likely than people who apply on Thursday mornings to pay off their loans. So the algorithm ends up biasing in ways humans can't.
Are you back?
Yes. So
Okay.
I'm wanting to know, the algorithm can pick up lots of different biases, even when those biases aren't baked into it. How can we think about it in our organizations and communities, trying to take advantage of the data that is there to make sure bias is not incorporated into it?
Okay, so that's a fantastic question. So you could look at it like this. When we're collecting data, we're collecting an extraordinary amount of information. And sometimes we go in there with one particular research question, which is we're looking at that data to see who is going to get a loan. But the data that is being collected is so expansive that the algorithm in itself, once that code is created and it's coming up with their recommendation, the algorithm can pick up things that the human eye would not be paying attention to. So when we think about something like Uber, of course we're using Uber, and Uber can tell you where there is traffic, where there's not traffic, what are the easiest streets, what are the streets that are most difficult, what are the times of days that we can get to certain points faster than other times. But then if we drill deeper into that Uber data, we can start to tell stories about people, about relationships, about where people are going, about the things that people like, about what supermarkets they go to, what are the times they go to those supermarkets, right? What are the kinds of novelty stores that they shop in? How many times have they been to a particular friend's house? Are they going to a particular address that is a very odd address, right? So that's what happens with data. Once you start to collect data, that data could start to bring up things that you were not paying attention to. Now, it's fantastic when we think about healthcare, when we think about education, when we think about climate justice and the environment, and how we could reduce poverty and how we could respond to crises. But then it could become problematic if we're using that Uber data to look at people's choices and preferences and the things that they like. So that's just what happens with data. You're gathering a lot. And sometimes in the development of the algorithm of the code, even the computer scientists and the developers, many of them are sometimes shocked by the things that the algorithms are actually presenting, things that they were not thinking about. So that's why data collection is so important. That's why data privacy is so important. And that's why questions around confidentiality and storage and use and reuse and disposal of data also very critical.
So to that point, Renee, it makes me think about the importance of data, as you mentioned, and the data, for example, we provide all around us, whether when we are using Uber or when we go on Facebook. And the fact that our data is monetized not always to our benefit.
Most definitely. And that's the challenge. We all have been using social media, and we all have been interacting on the internet and using so many different platforms for so long. So we have all created a data profile. But the thing is, we don't know what that profile looks like because data is not something that we can see. But we do know the things that we like, we dislike, the emojis that we shared, the things that we have read, the amount of time that we focus on something, thinking about that, just that sentiment, all of that is being captured. And it's creating a profile. And that is the profile that's being used when we apply for a loan, when we apply for an educational scholarship, when we decide to get insurance, or when we are going to access healthcare. That's the data that's being scraped by these cartels, these data brokers who are repackaging and repurposing and reusing our data. And that's the challenge. So not only is it being monetized, and someone is benefiting and profiting from that, but it could be weaponized against us. So when we think of something like facial recognition, where did all those images come to train that model? They were scraped from the internet, from Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and Twitter and all the places that we shared our information. But then when that information is now used against you, and we see cases of mistaken identity and wrongful arrest, or just challenges that we're seeing with this technology, you're asking yourself, there's a balance there that needs to be met. And that balance, to me, is that question around ethics.
And that ethics is really important to keep in mind as you were talking about us training the algorithms and providing it the data, is that we are all mesmerized. Those people who have spent time on generative AI, ChatGPT, are mesmerized with it, not understanding that we have trained ChatGPT with our internet usage and data and things we have put up. So we have created this either very powerful algorithms or this monster. It's from our data.
Definitely, because a ChatGPT is trained on large language models, and large language models are models where the information are definitely scraped out of public spaces. So everything that we have shared, everything that we have liked, everything that we have disliked, that's where that information is coming from. Now, whether or not that is quality information, that is the challenge. What is the quality of that information? Is it toxic? What are the sentiments? Is it bigoted? Is it racist? Is it friendly? Is it unfriendly? Is it harmful for certain groups? Is it hurtful for women? So there's all of the things that have created anxiety and challenges and problems in society is part of that large language model. So when we can use it, and you can use it if you have writer's block, you can use it if you want to get a sort of like an outline for an essay, or you can use it to come up with a recipe, or you can use it to come up with code, or do all of those great things. There are major challenges because of the fact that it's a large language model, because of the fact we are the human experiment and continue to be the experiment that this model is being trained on. There are great challenges there, and the challenges are even a little more contentious because most people have not been trained in that language called AI with that requisite level of literacy and understanding that ChatGPT is a tool. It is not something that you can believe in. And of course, now we're seeing all the contractual challenges, questions around deception, AI hallucination, and all of the other challenges that this fantastic technology and tool that can create an extraordinary amount of innovation and could spark so much creative thinking is also something that undermines civil rights, undermines your intellectual property, creates some very unique challenges for creatives and persons whose jobs have been to provide us with the kind of creativity that ChatGPT may now be taking a market of that, So interesting times, but it calls for a lot of critical thinking.
Yeah, and that critical thinking, Julie asked a question that I think is very close to your heart. She said she has wondered, is there any effort to legislate a requirement for algorithm transparency? And I'll build on that because I know for you, transparency, accountability, and fairness are important. Can you speak to that and answer Julie's question specifically about legislating requirements for algorithm transparency?
Most definitely, and thank you for that fantastic question, Julie. So it comes under that framework of accountability. So one of the things that we're seeing now is the creation of legislation that looks at algorithmic accountability. How do we audit algorithms? And if we're auditing algorithms, then we are auditing within that transparency and explainability framework. Of course, last October, the White House deployed the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, which provides 5 framework concepts that really looks at the ways in which we need to build that requisite level of accountability and transparency and explainability into algorithms. In 2016, we had the Algorithmic Accountability Act. Of course, we know the EU is working on soon to go into law, the EU AI Act. So there's much conversation that's happening. Most recently, the Department of Housing, I know that the FTC did put out a release about 2 days ago that says that we've got to become we've got to investigate housing algorithms. We've got to look at things like digital redlining. We have to look at the ways in which algorithms in housing have been really deploying an extraordinary amount of bias and an extraordinary amount of discrimination. And I know the FTC saying that housing and algorithms in housing is now a key focus, and we are going to bring more equity into that space, more accountability, and there has to be auditing of those algorithms. So transparency falls under the accountability framework, which is an aspect of course, auditability, which is so critical. So that is indeed a fantastic question. And that at the moment is where there is a lot of excitement and a lot of movement. And I think just a few minutes ago, before I came on this Zoom, I saw that some colleagues of mine have actually created a certificate course in algorithmic auditing to be on time and ready, because New York City is changing some of its hiring or enhancing some of its hiring practices because of algorithms, and accountability and auditability and transparency are now going to be very, very critical aspects of hiring practices in New York. So we need to know how to audit those algorithms. So excellent question.
And I would highly encourage the audience to also reflect on the algorithms that are being used, whether they use ATSs. A lot of companies that I've interacted with, they have asked, does your system discriminate? And they say, no, it doesn't discriminate, but they don't have any, there's no transparency in knowing what is the algorithm that the third-party provider is using in screening these resumes, in screening these candidates. There are lots of algorithms that we are using in our lives where we are clueless about. And I really encourage people who are using these systems for their businesses, not just to take the provider's word for it, that no, it doesn't discriminate. That doesn't necessarily mean much about the algorithm having been looked into with
Most definitely a fantastic point, because we've got to think about, from a business perspective, you've got to think about your risks, you've got to think about the kinds of crises that can be created, and you've got to think about those algorithms and how they need to be audited. A lot of companies are doing vulnerability audits on their algorithms, they're doing impact assessments on their algorithms, and they are really trying to come up with ways in which they can audit. The challenge is this: at the moment, there is no standard operating procedure when it comes to auditing algorithm. We don't have forensic algorithm auditors, which is something that we may see very soon in the future, forensic auditors who can just focus on algorithms. So it's really incumbent on companies and organizations and agencies to ensure that their algorithms are audited. And I think they say just about every 6 months, you need to pay attention to what those algorithms are doing, because if you don't, as a company, you can find yourself deep into a crisis, or you may find yourself losing business because you did not have a contingency plan for an algorithm that went, rogue on you. So you really want to think about how your business model supports the adoption of AI and algorithmic decision-making systems. And if you are planning to include algorithmic decision-making systems into your business model, you need to include that with change management plan and a crisis management and risk management plan at the same time.
And I do believe, Renee, that organizations that don't start implementing and incorporating AI into some aspects of their business will drastically fall behind. So we as leaders need to be informed about it. But before thinking about some positive applications where we in our organizations and in the community can incorporate AI, I want to get to Liz's question also. Liz says, how do we control our digital identities? How do we coexist with these technologies which are growing?
Now, Liz, that is a hard question. It's a challenging question, and it's a question that I do not have an answer for, because we have given up so much of ourselves using the internet. And once you give data, there is no way to pull it back. So none of us truly know what our digital identity looks like, what our data profile looks like, what our data twin looks like. And that's the challenge, because when we started to use the internet and we started to use these fun social media platform, we just didn't know that all that data that they were collecting on us would really turn around to be used either, to monetize it or to weaponize it. And again, that's the challenge. When we were sharing things on Facebook and sharing things on Instagram, we never knew that that kind of data could really say what we were politically inclined to do, how we were emotionally inclined to act, what are the things that moved us and the things that didn't move us, and how could we be moved? So it's a lot of psychology that goes into the creation of these algorithms as well. So unfortunately, there is really no way for us to know what we look on the other side, of this computer. But the thing is this: as we move forward, You need to understand that you have rights. You have data rights and you have digital rights. And in the world of AI and in this datafied world that we now exist in, you do have rights. And you need to just pay more attention to the ways in which you are using technology. And you need to ensure that you are very proficient in this new language called AI. And you need to ensure that you have a right to know. You have a right to know when surveillance technology is being used against you. You have a right to know when you're interacting with an algorithm. You have a right to know that an algorithm has made a decision about you. You have a right to know that there is some form of redress if an algorithm has made a decision about you and it's a decision that you are not happy with. And you also have a right to know how an algorithm is being used to design your future. And you have a right to participate in that, and you also have a right to opt out of that. So I think it's really calling for us to even reimagine our relationship with technology in real time.
Yeah, and because the what you're very familiar with, Renee, and I've been surprised at talking to certain people, other people who are also very familiar with this, is that the potential of the algorithm to emotionally manipulate us is incredible, to a sense that they can manipulate us and know us better than we know ourselves. That's why this is a very serious conversation for us to have in our communities, because these tools are way beyond the capabilities of what most people assume of the initial social media days. They just know my likes based on me clicking like, as opposed to, in some senses, the algorithm knows my emotions better than I know my emotions, knows what triggers me even better than I know what triggers me.
So what the algorithm has is really a record of past behaviors, and that is what data is about. Data carries with it a memory, so that algorithm has that data, and that data contains the memory of all those decisions that you made on social media, good ones, bad ones, not so good ones, ones that you didn't complete. But this is it. An algorithm is being built with data. And the challenge with an algorithm is that sometimes much of the information that we shared was information that was captured at a moment in time, but we change our minds, we develop, we enhance our thinking, we come to new levels of knowledge and consciousness, but the algorithm is stuck in time once an algorithm is developed and deployed. And of course, what we would hope is that that new information would change the ways in which that algorithm is thinking. But I don't think it's going to happen like that. So it's really about having that awareness and that education, and really sourcing the kind of information that you need to ensure that you are well informed, and to ensure that you can have the kind of vigilance that's required, so you don't get yourself sucked into any sorts of situations of deception. Because one of the other aspects of an algorithm is the deception, and the fact that many of these developers and these vendors who create it and sell it are really overpromising, and then the algorithms underdeliver.
Now, Renee, I would love to also get your thoughts. Folks involved in LGW, both with their organizations and in the community, want to make a positive difference. And this is one of the most, if not the most powerful technology humanity has ever come across. So how can we use artificial intelligence for good? So Mark Burgell, founder of our Shared Humanity Project, on social good of ending poverty, or even organizations and teams that we run, how can AI be used for good?
Fantastic. So as I said at the beginning, there is no AI without data. So AI is built using data. What we can do is ensure that when we are building these algorithms, or we are creating these models, we are using high quality data. We are also bringing data sets that come with a unique kind of understanding and interpretation and critical thinking. How do we use this thing for good? Well, it's already being used for good. The ways in which we're communicating now, the ways in which algorithms are enhancing our transport system, aviation, healthcare, business models, business intelligence, the ways in which just every industry, every sector, every discipline, every business model is now being reimagined. The thing about data, in as much as it could be very destructive, and in as much as it can create some very contentious and volatile decisions, when you get good data, you can do good things. Good data means that you could impact social change, you could impact political change, you could impact economic change, you can make governments and agencies more accountable, you can design more interactive and inclusive and engaging and diverse programming. You can create algorithms that work to lift up your employees, or algorithms that are being used in healthcare that could really reverse things like intergenerational trauma, something that I'm working on. So there are great ways and ways in which algorithms are being used at the moment when we think about cancer research, when we think about gene therapy, when we think about illnesses that children have, and when we think about just the ways in which the world is being enhanced by this technology. So it's being used for good. It can do really great things. The challenge is we've got to ensure that as a collective, as a globe, we have the ethical resilience and the ethical vigilance to ensure that the things that we are building are the things that could enhance and the things that could make society develop and progress, and not things that are going to create vulnerabilities and chaos and really push us back, or things that are going to underdevelop certain communities.
So with respect to that, Renee, I know you also were a criminologist, are a criminologist. With algorithms, now Amazon has become pretty good at knowing what we are going to buy. So pretty soon, hypothetical exercise, pretty soon Amazon can send us a box with 6 items, being pretty sure we're going to at least keep 4 of those items and then send the other 2 back. Because our purchase behavior, they know what we are going to do in the future.
Yes.
So with the criminology side of it, that level of thinking is also being applied on law enforcement fronts. Would love to get your thoughts on that.
So it's one thing if you buy sunglasses, some sunscreen, some, Folgers coffee singles, some hot honey. Those are different things. Those are things, if they send you in a box, you may like 4, you may not like 2, you put it in your pantry and you leave it until it expires. It's not a big thing. Or you often get a shirt in the wrong size, or they send you something in a particular color and you're not feeling it anymore because the day that you were actually looking at that shirt, or you purchased that shirt, it was for a vacation that never happened. That's fine. Those are things that we can get rid of. Criminal justice is different. These are human lives. So when we're trying to build these algorithms with that kind of precision, saying that we can predict by the way someone walks whether or not that person is a perpetrator, or we can predict if an individual did 2 things that they will do something else, that's pseudoscience. And we don't practice that. And we're certainly not going to practice or deploy those kinds of algorithms where human life is at stake. One of the things that we know about an algorithm is it does not have a conscience. It doesn't have ability to really think on its own. It doesn't have an ability to come to a particular realization. An algorithm doesn't have the ability to be inspired. When I listen to Mahan, I am inspired. I'm motivated to be a better Renee. I'm motivated to be a better leader. An algorithm does not have that kind of human to human interaction. So sure, it can say, because you watch these 5 movies on Netflix, you're going to watch these 5, or you're going to enjoy these 5. But just that particular day that I watched that movie, I was feeling a little, multicultural. So I watched 3 things Bollywood, 3 things Nollywood from Nigeria. But hey, that was just that one day because a friend said, have you ever seen some of these African movies? But it's not my regular pattern. We can't take those chances in the criminal justice system. When we're talking about lives, we're talking about liberty, we are talking about longevity, and legacies. So law enforcement, criminal justice are really not places that we want to take a chance with just deploying algorithms in a very capricious and cavalier manner. It needs a lot more thinking because to date, many of the algorithms that have been deployed by the police, have been deployed by border control, that have been deployed by law enforcement in general, have not been able to deliver what they promise. We have been using predictive analytics in policing for over 20 years, and many of those predictive analytics systems, what we call intelligence-led policing, or what we call now precision policing, have not been very precise when it comes to reducing crime and violence and homicide, or have not been very intelligent when it comes to understanding the dynamics of communities. So when we can use algorithms, yes, we can use a few of them here, there, doing some administrative stuff. I will not advise anyone to just deploy algorithms on the streets or deploy algorithms in the criminal justice system because these are human lives. This is not a box of cookies. It's not a movie. It's really a life.
It is, and that's why we have to be very careful about it, and also, again, mindful and understanding that they are being used.
Of
So,
course.
and I know it's gone through review systems, but the Metropolitan Police Department uses it to
Of
determine
course.
where to go. So it's not as if this is a future date.
No, and
This
they've
is
been using it
happening
for
right
quite
now.
some time. They've been using it for quite some time. But the challenge is this: when they do their own auditing of their strategies and their tactics, they're realizing that they've not become more efficient. They've not become more effective. They've not really enhanced or improved the communities in which they engage, or the communities in which they police. What it does sometimes, it makes you very lazy, because what the algorithm says, because these algorithms are continuously built on historic data. They are continuously built on data that was used in the past to create past decisions. And what they continue to do is over police the same communities that we continue to over police, and not bring one new idea into those communities. The other challenge with those algorithms is that too many of those algorithms that are being used in policing are being designed under the veil of we are doing something for the community, and that is not the issue. So one of the things that you're going to see more and more when it comes to accountability and transparency, auditability, is the procurement practices in the criminal justice system and in law enforcement when it comes to procuring algorithms, because again, those third-party vendors developing these things and over-promising, because the amount of algorithms that have already been deployed across America, you would think that crime should be really at an all-time low. But somehow the correlation between the deployment of an algorithm and the reduction of crime and violence and homicide, there's no correlation there. Those are sometimes vanity projects for law enforcement.
They are, and they spend a lot of money on it. But something that has been, again, past 6-7 months or so in the minds of lots of people is the power of generative AI and ChatGPT. And about a month or so ago, 1,000+ people in the field, some of them for their own reasons, but I know quite a few of them, well-intentioned, wanting to raise an alarm about this, asked for stopping the development of more advanced generative artificial intelligence technologies, saying this is going to lead to a lot of chaos and serious issues. What are your thoughts about where generative AI is headed, its potential, and what we need to be concerned about?
Well, I would say this. I would think many of the scholars and the ethicists and the activists and the individuals who were part of that call to take pause, to just hold back, I would say that their concern was not feigned. It is a real concern, because these are the individuals who understand that very lethal landscape called large language models and how toxic these models can be. And I think that concern came with the fact that there was really no manual that was deployed with this generative AI technology. So it was something new. It was something that was being built in the lab. It was something that was deployed on society and the scale and speed at which it was adopted and continues to be adopted created an extraordinary amount of concern. So the concern is real. What I think we would like to look at is that I believe that we have a very strong and vibrant and robust community of ethicists and activists who can ensure that we create those requisite guardrails that are required to protect our rights, to mitigate those risks, and to harness the rewards of this technology. So I believe that we do have the people power and the mind power and the ethical consciousness to ensure that we do this thing right. The challenge is the people who have the ability to provide that kind of ethical guidance and ethical vigilance may not be the people who these companies are actually hiring at speed and at scale to assist them, because everyone wants to go to market first. Everyone wants to just deploy this technology. So where is generative AI going? It's going, and it's going to keep going, and it's going to keep getting more sophisticated, and it's going to be part of everything that we do, because it does provide for individuals. Now, I will say this to you. I have seen so many demonstrations of generative AI, even by the founder himself, Sam Adelman. When I was in DC, actually in January, he brought together about 20 policymakers in the DC, Virginia, Maryland area. I was one of them, and he had a conversation with us about the technology, the things that he wanted to do, the kinds of limitations. So this technology is not going anywhere. It is only going to get better. And this is why I said at the beginning, AI is a language that requires a requisite level of proficiency for you to be literate in it. Generative AI is another expression of that language. So people just need to upskill themselves in real time and understand generative AI is a tool that can be used to make some of our tasks easier, but it's also a tool that can create a certain amount of chaos in your life if you do not bring a critical thinking lens to the ways in which you are using the technology.
So Renee, one thought that Liz shared, I somewhat have a different view. She says technology itself is amoral. It's what we do with it. My 2 cents on it is technology could be amoral. That said, all of these AI systems are trained on past data sets, and therefore they pick up the morality or lack thereof of those past data sets. So that's something to be aware of. That said, though, would love to get your thoughts on the impact AI, not just generative AI, will have on our professions, our organizations over the next few years.
It's extraordinary, and it's happening, and it's exciting. This is a great time for research. This is a great time for development. This is an amazing time for progress. The kind of development and progress that we're going to see is just going to be mind-blowing. What we need to ensure that the things that we do with AI are sustainable and are able to build a resilient society. We are using this technology to design our future, and I think it's going to create an extraordinary amount of access, an extraordinary amount of opportunities, and it's going to really generate a lot of new resources that we can now lean on to do some amazing things in this place that we call home, this world. The challenge is, if we don't do this within an ethical framework, we can find ourselves in a lot of trouble, because we have realized the data, the main ingredient of an algorithm, is very powerful. Where there is power, there is prestige, because we're able to do these amazing things to enhance not only the profits of the organization, but our quality of life. But there's also space for prejudice. And where there is prejudice, this same algorithm can actually consciously and unconsciously persecute certain groups. So we have got to be very careful. So this is why I always speak about ethical vigilance and ethical resilience. And I always speak about due diligence. That's your critical thinking when you are using this technology or you are designing, developing, deploying, procuring, adopting this technology. Duty of care and ethics of care also very important when we are thinking about adopting, developing, or using this technology. Due process, which is about equity and it's about fairness, because we realize that an algorithm has the ability to also undermine civil rights and human rights and these hard fought for rights that we have assumed that are now part of our lives. So we don't want the chaos, but what we do want would be the creativity. So to mitigate the chaos and to lift up the creativity, you have got to bring critical thinking into the space. So this is why justice and equity and diversity and inclusion are so critical and are critical ingredients to the design of algorithms and the design of AI. Because if we do that, it means what we are getting would be inclusive technology. It would mean what we are getting would be the stretching of the imagination of this technology and the ability to do extraordinary things. But always remember, with that ability to do extraordinary things, unchecked, this technology has the ability to do extraordinarily dangerous things. And that is what we don't want.
And that's why I am thrilled to have someone as smart with such a beautiful heart as you, Renee, part of this conversation. One of the things that I think about is when people who had very low emotional intelligence in many instances were at the beginning of the social media boom, they ended up impacting our society in ways that we still are trying to come to grips with. So, with all due respect to Mark Zuckerberg dropping out of Harvard and people celebrating that, it's people like that, in my view, that have contributed to some of the societal issues. We need to be careful. This is a much more powerful technology with much more potential for good and much more potential for bad in our societies, in our organizations, in our communities. That's why we are thrilled to have voices like yours involved in those conversations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that.
I am thrilled. I really appreciate everyone at the LGW for being part of this conversation. And whenever you are in DC, we love to see you in person. I do want to let everyone know that, thank you, Jennifer and Liz. I do want to let everyone know this is an area that for myself over the past 4 or 5 years, I've been studying different aspects of AI, past year going deep into it, because I truly believe this will transform all of our lives significantly. And this is not hyperbole. This is truly, I think our organizations will also be transformed. That's why following insights like Professor Cummings is important. And I'm thrilled to have her as a voice for ethics in this process. We also have additional conversations coming up. I'm hoping you can join and or watch each and every one of those. Dan Turchin is CEO of People Reign, which is an AI organization and also talks to a lot of top AI thought leaders. Louis Rosenberg is the person, one of the pioneers of augmented reality. Wait until June and Apple rolls out first their very expensive $3,000 AR glasses. This will be a new world with augmented reality. Louis Rosenberg developed that for Air Force back in the late 1980s. Then Mark Schaefer on content and impact of generative AI on content and community. Then Emily Yu, she has an AI company focused specifically on good in the community. So taking the data from, for example, food deserts, taking the data from food insecurity and seeing how we can use the data for good, AI for good. So, Professor Cummings, we are so honored and thrilled that you were able to join us in this conversation. Thank you for the great
Thank
work
you
that
so
you do,
much.
and thank you for your advocacy as well.
Take care. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.